Okay, I think I'd like to get started with the goal of ending on time. This is the November 21st, 2019 meeting of the Concord High School Building Committee. I wanted to make mention of one thing as we start. We have some new people here, and for the people on the television, to just be very clear, we're meeting at the Ripley School. This is a school facility, but I want to emphasize the fact that the building committee is a town committee. Okay, it's appointed by the selectmen, and it's a committee of the town of Concord. We don't want for people listening in to be confusion about that, because as we go through the process, it's important in Concord that the building committee be a committee of the town and not simply a committee of the school. In the context of that, there are, I believe it's of the 17 members, 10 or 11 are citizens of Concord, as opposed to school employees or town employees. So we just want to remind people of that context as you watch the deliberations and understand how the committee works. Okay. Today we have a few objectives. As you all know, we've selected SMMA as our design partner that we'll be working with probably for the next 3 years, which is exciting. And we're going to be, they're going to be introducing themselves a little more formally to the committee and talking and providing a little bit of the presentation that the design selection process saw, so the entire committee can familiarize themselves with the designer. Then we will move into the discussion of some specifics. We'll go over the schedule and talk a little bit about the first thing, where we are with the schedule of the contract, approving the contract for the designer. That probably will not take long. Not that there hasn't been work done, it's just a short presentation. And then we'll talk a little bit about the overall schedule of the project. As you know, we've got some aggressive notions and some more conservative notions, and we're going to talk a little bit today about where we are with that process. Okay, so we sort of all get on the same page of where we are. Then we will talk a little bit about the first next steps. Okay, the designer will fill us in on sort of the first steps of the educational vision. Okay, so we'll hear about that today. And then we'll return to the project charter. I want to thank everybody who sent in some input. A good many of you did send in some input on synthesizing some of the general comments that we had versus each of the areas into a more focused statement, and that's some good work done on that. We'll talk about the next steps in relation to defining our project, overall project objectives or charter. And then we'll have correspondence. I think we've received at least one note Dana mentioned. And we'll have public comments, and we'll adjourn hopefully about 9 o'clock. Okay, so that's what we have in mind today. And with that, I'll turn it over to the design team to introduce themselves and tell us a little about the program.
Great, thank you for inviting us here. We're very, very excited to be working with you on this project. My name is Kristen Olson. I'm an architect and the project manager for this project. Well, I'll just have the team go around from this.
So my name is Matt Rice. I'm going to be the project architect working on the project, and my goal is really to see through the initial programming and visioning sessions all the way through to the end of the construction documents to make sure that those initial visions are realized in the final built environment.
Phil Winelli, SMMA educational planner. I'll be working with Keith and the Ewing Cole team and school department, working through and developing both the vision and the educational planning documents.
I'm Lorraine Finnegan. I am an architect, but I will be your principal in charge. And I don't think anyone here may remember except Frank. I had the pleasure of working on Alcotton's Row a number of years ago.
Good morning, I'm Martine Dion. I'm the Director of Sustainable Design at SMMA. I have a little bit of a laryngitis, apologize. I will oversee all aspects of sustainability for the project, and we have also Lois Arena, who's not present today, with whom we will collaborate from Stephen Winters Associates.
I'm Keith Fallon. I'm an architect. I happen to be with Ewing Cole. We're out of Philadelphia, and we're very pleased to be with SMMA again. We've worked with them at Lincoln. So we'll be responsible for programming, planning, visioning, and design components of the project.
Mike Dowhan, I'm Senior Landscape Architect with SMMA. I'll be overseeing all the site design, all the integrations of the building with the landscape, as well as all the athletic facility design.
Great, so since not everyone.
Yeah, that would be probably be helpful for us to do the same thing.
That'd be great.
That'd
be lovely.
Bigger group. My name's Tim Holm. I'm a Concord resident, and I'm the co-chair of the building committee.
Lori Hunter, Superintendent of Schools.
Jared Stick, Director of Finance and Operations.
Kate Hanley, I'm the Director of Sustainability for the town.
Pat Nelson, I'm a citizen.
I'm Heather Bowden on the school committee.
Susan Bates on select board representation.
Frank Gannon, I'm a member of the building committee. And Russ Hughes, facilities manager for the school district.
John Harris with the Town Finance Committee, Finance Department.
Julie LeDuc with Hill International, the OPM.
And as well with Hill International, OPM.
Justin Cameron, principal of Concord Middle School.
Dawn Guariello, co-chair with Tim of the school building committee, and also an architect and a parent and resident of Concord.
Chris Popo, community volunteer.
Charlie Parker, community volunteer.
Okay, hopefully that's the last time we have to do that for a while.
We usually name tags.
Yeah.
I didn't get to my office
It's all
because
good.
of the traffic, so.
Next time you will.
It looks too much like the house, whatever it is.
Yeah, right. All the earrings
I've seen too much of that.
Y'all get a lot.
We're a little friendlier than
Please
that.
proceed.
So we realized that not everyone could be at the interview, and I'm not sure how many of you were able to review the recording. So we thought we'd do a very abbreviated run through of our slides. As you know, it was a 40-minute presentation, and some members of the interview team aren't here, so we're kind of consolidating and just going to run through those quickly, and we can always come back if you have any questions about any of the material that we presented.
Thank you, Kristen. As Kristen said, we're very excited to be working in Concord again. We think this is a fantastic project. And as I said in the interview, it's very rare to work with a district who has put so much thought already into your vision and your goals. And I think, Dawn, we work in similar fields, so you know this, and I'm sure that's part of the driving factor was making sure you all have your goals established before you even hire us, so that we're working from something that's developed. So we put together a team that we feel really meets those visions and goals. Our educational planning team will be led by Keith and Phil as they introduce themselves. Keith brings a national perspective, Phil brings that local perspective, and together we feel we're really going to balance the flexibility and the collaboration through the visioning process. Martine will lead our sustainable design team, as she mentioned. Lois from Stephen Winters, as well as Andy Olderman, our director of engineering, have a real sense of and expertise in sustainable design, passive house, net zero, and they'll bring those skills to you. And the design team led by Matt and Saul, who's from Keith's office, Mike Dowhan, as well as Stephen from Mitch, really know how to mold that vision, that program, and those goals together into a building that is both responsible and beautiful. So that is the team that we set before you. We feel we really encompass your goals.
The next slides were to discuss our workload and our capacity for this project, so I'm not going to go into that in too much detail. The schedules presented were based on the information in the RFS, and since that time we've had some early discussions with Hill, and we have revised schedules in the packet to discuss later on. So we'll discuss that in more detail later. And then a couple slides on our integrated model, where we are an architect engineering firm, and Martine and Andy and our engineers and architects all sit together, work together, and collaborate from day one. So that's a very unique and exciting opportunity we have at our office. And then we've embraced additional AEs who have a similar format into the team.
So, thank you. This slide was really to showcase how we're really looking forward to engage with your team and with the Concord community, and how we're familiar and really commending your efforts in terms of sustainability and climate change readiness. Oops, sorry. And it's a feasibility study. It's really a great opportunity, and it's the time to be looking into your interest in doing certification for net zero energy. If that's of interest, we're looking forward, obviously, to look at your project beyond net zero energy and really make it a comprehensive, sustainable, and healthy building. In terms of the your RFS kind of listed a EUI goal of 25, which we think is very feasible. As you can see up here, the new Massachusetts stretch code, which is being mandated this January, shows sort of will require an EUI between 40 and 50. We think that 25 and 30 is very feasible in achieving. The gap between the stretch code and net zero is really narrowing. So I think it's very, it's a very good thing for your community to be thinking ahead and seeking this goal. By the time you build this school, a lot of the schools in Massachusetts are going to be at net zero. Right now, there's about 15 in design and construction. So EUI, for those of you who are not familiar, is the metric used to compare net zero schools. So in the presentation, we gave a little bit of an overview of our project and included your existing school, which is at 135.
Justin's embarrassed. It's not your fault. This building's actually worse. That's one of the higher numbers I've seen, I'll be honest.
So we can talk about a little bit more in detail the pathway to net zero, but in the presentation we went through how it has to do with designing the building, making it ready or potentially procuring the renewables. But one big important component is the people that are going to be living in it or studying and operating it. So we do put a 20% contingency into planning the energy use in terms of that. What we're going to look to do with this project is really optimize all the systems, enclosure, electrical, mechanical. We're going to look to do commissioning. I'll skip this because I talked about behavior, we'll talk about it in more detail in upcoming discussions. And renewable energy, hopefully all on site as much as possible, optimizing the site. And then we give an example of the Honeywell feasibility study where we, at feasibility study, we did a good amount of energy modeling, compared stretch code, different HVAC system, and the outcome was a premium cost of 0.3%, less than 1%, which is why we think it's feasible to get there. For your school, that would mean a 3.1 year payback, that 0.3%. And that's at your rate without the demand charges. That's at your Concord municipal rates. I think Andy went over the MVP systems, HVAC systems, really looking at quality versus quantitative. And these are going to be part of our discussions, you and your team, and planning and selecting the HVAC systems, and making sure that what you're gonna end up with in the building is something that you can easily operate over the next 50 years. Passive apps. Louis is not here. This is something that was brought up in the RFS, and we wanted to make sure we address it. This is, we basically, for our projects, we really look forward to, we are using passive house concepts to get to net zero. It's a great pathway. Passive house is not something that's just about houses. It does address large buildings, and that's where Lois and Stephen Winter bring their experience.
Just worth stating again that the passive house challenge is really a substantial one, but the expertise that Lois brings to the team is really in that large scale passive house world. So there have been no schools that have been passive house certified in the United States of this size. There have been some smaller ones. But looking forward to sort of challenging that goal and really achieving that goal, we think that Lois is a wonderful partner to help the entire team get there. So we did just want to mention quickly our experience in terms of both educational design and envisioning as we go through the design process. SMMA brings many years sort of thorough background on that. You can see here just a few of the images of our recent projects that have opened. I'm not going to actually go into too much detail there. This is really just to give a quick background in terms of our understanding of K-12 school design in Massachusetts. We have a tremendous amount of experience with the MSBA process. Not that this is an MSBA project, but we know that we're going to be following that model of the process, and so we will bring that expertise along. Go down.
Yeah.
And just to remind everyone that we're responsible for the Alcott and Thoreau projects in our office about 15 years ago. There's many things that have evolved since those projects that have been built, but just to illustrate our familiarity with it.
I spent a little time introducing our firm. We are also an integrated AE firm, so we have a broad and deep portfolio. We're also energy savvy. I mentioned the fact that that image at the top is Smithsonian Environmental Research Lab, which LEED Platinum building. So we are very sympathetic with the approach that SMMA adopts. I cited a few examples of our design leadership team to look at social space, landscape, detailing of the envelope, making comfortable places for people. Spent some time looking at some of our current, and I'm not getting this to advance, here we go, some of the current projects in our office, not in and of themselves, but more as a vehicle for showing the varied educational clients that we work with and how that prepares us to engage with your team in a collaborative basis, including the Hanscom Primary and Middle School, which I understand some of you may have seen. This is the project that introduced us to Lincoln and then also introduced us to MMA and now to you. The point of those was that each project is unique. The design of the facility is tied to the way you approach education, and our process in the world of education, there's a wide discussion about pedagogy, and then there's also a wide discussion about facilities responses. And some of those are generic and they touch everybody, and then some of them are quite specific. And so we think that really what's important is to identify the things that are unique to the way you teach, and then therefore find a building which responds to that in a very specific way. And then that is how you'll create a school which embodies the spirit and the culture of your community. We're really interested in doing this. And so getting at the core of how you want to teach and then finding the building that not only enables that, but encourages it and communicates that to people about what you believe is important. I talked a little bit about the process of Lincoln. I'm not going to talk about it today because time is running out. And then we just made a few comments about your site plan, your feasibility study, not your site plan, or your initial program document. Maybe a potential here that we included in our initial proposal, and then maybe just a demonstration of an alternate way that you might approach that. I gave an example of a school that we had done before that maybe pulled the diagram apart a little bit. It provided narrower program blocks, provided the opportunity to introduce daylight, particularly in hub or team teaching spaces. And then we suggested maybe that there's, I will say that generally we don't really like doing this. And the reason, like, we feel like we need to do it to show everybody that we're invested and that we're creative. But this is a document that comes out of no dialogue with you, right? So in some ways, we just showed you a picture that shows actually we think it's a pretty good approach, but but at the same time, you know, it needs to come out of our dialogue with you. And like one of the things is like you can show this diagram and people love it, and another time people hate it because they think, you know, we didn't hit what's important to you. So that's kind of a summary of the things we've talked about.
So with that, I wanted to take a moment to see if there are any questions about any of that material so far.
I actually have two. One is, I'm sorry I missed the beginning of your interview, and I heard it was great, so congratulations. I noticed in your workflow chart or your workload chart, it didn't mention Waltham High School, and that was something I brought up in the deliberation. I just didn't know and didn't think to look at the end of it. Can you address that?
I'm happy to.
Okay.
Full disclosure, I'm a Waltham resident. I'm praying that the school will be built before my 3-year-old and 4-year-old get to go there. I am the project manager for that project, and we were hired in March 6, 2016. So that project is in litigation. It has not achieved substantial completion from the MSBA. It is on its 4th extension of its feasibility study agreement, and possibly its last. Because the city took a property by eminent domain where they wanted to put the high school in litigation over the table. So we have no sense of when it's going to come back.
Okay, so it's still in feasibility, but it's on hold because of litigation.
Yep.
Okay.
And as you know, I know you have a project in litigation, so you know what happens. So our concern was we had been pursuing projects and then not pursuing projects. We'd been asked to interview on projects and turn them down because Waltham was always hanging out there. And I love Waltham High School. It's going to be a fantastic project when we get it off the ground. But we continue to either defer projects or turn down previous clients because of it.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, we hired up. We hired up within our firm. We hired 30 people over the last year to be prepared for when Waltham starts, because it was always sort of out there and it was hindering us progressing on other projects because of it. So Waltham will be staffed sufficiently. Concord will be staffed sufficiently. There's no risk if Waltham started tomorrow that Concord would be in peril. Another reason we teamed with Ewing Cole on this is to add that additional capacity to us.
Mm-hmm.
Having that, you know, we had a really collaborative experience on Lincoln. We're really happy with the design ethos the two firms share. So extending out with Ewing Cole actually extends our capacity even further.
Okay, thank you. I mean, in the deliberation, it was like, they said they could do it, and I have to take you at your word. So I just wanted to hear where that was in relation. So thank you for that. The other thing that came up in deliberation, and if you watched it, you would have known that Dawn Whittier, who was also in contention, brought in, and this was unique for me, I gave them huge props for doing it. They brought in the former principal of Situate, Gates, and to sort of bridge that gap between the design and the educators, and sort of working with them to understand how to use this new facility that they have, which is a brilliant idea and good for them for bringing that to the table. I made the suggestion that I thought you guys could somehow, between Phil and Keith and others, fulfill that same desire, because I know from a superintendent standpoint, I was sitting there saying, oh my gosh, if Justin had been here and with Dr. Hunter, they must be like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever, because they speak the language, right? So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, let you know that that was desirable on their end and brought them sort of up in contention. But in the end, you guys obviously did a better job holistically and are here because of that. And just wanted to bring that to your attention as far as something that may be desirable moving forward. So I know I was impressed, and I do this all the time. I was like, wow, good for them. Like, they're thinking outside the box. So just wanted to let you know.
I would build on that. Like, we've had the opportunity to tour, I think, 5 or 6 schools now, and several of them are employing this new use of space to support integrated teams in learning. And what becomes clear when you see that you've now taken off a whole set of limitations to the educational process in terms of the space and how to use the space. okay, with small rooms and big rooms and integrated space and maker rooms and a whole series of things that don't exist in schools that were built 30 years ago. It's sort of, as you go through several of those tours, number one, you're inspired about what's going to happen for the kids. But secondly, you understand that there's a whole set of knowledge relating to the use of the space in a creative way that has to be addressed and brought to the educational staff and the new building is the opportunity to do that. So I think to sort of reinforce what Don said, we'd really like to see your ideas on how we do that with the educational staff. And I would not articulate that as well as Lori did, but I think it was important to us. One of the big takeaways of the design selection process is we want to be able to do that.
And start now, from a professional development standpoint, right? Like work with Justin and his teachers now so that when they get there, they're like right into it, right? Like they already know what all the spaces are meant for, so.
May I just spend 2 minutes? So, Ryan Lynch, I believe, he's no longer the principal. I think part of the success of the Gates is having an educator and an educational district that is willing to push the boundaries.
We talked about that.
And what our team of Keith and Phil will do is push you on pushing those boundaries, and that's something we've seen them do a lot. I know you've already done school tours. We haven't had the opportunity to walk those spaces with you and hear your comments on it. So one of the things we would like to do is actually do more school tours, and I know Keith would like to personally walk you through the Hanscom project, even though you've done that. So it's a benefit to us to understand your likes and dislikes and your reactions to something and hear why you think a space might work for you or might not work for you, for us to be able to push and pull you in the direction. And having progressive principal and having progressive superintendent is, key to moving the ball forward when it comes to designing those types of spaces.
I want to give other people a chance to ask questions, but I also, Stephen and Kurt have arrived here, and I want to make, if there's any way to make a little room around the table, I want all the members of the committee. Thank you. Okay, any comments? This is sometimes these comments right now in terms of your understanding what the point of the is. So are there any other members of the committee that
I'm just curious, have you done this before, the kind of marrying of the planning, the new spaces and how to use the new spaces with engaging teachers in understanding from the get-go, early on in the project? I wonder if you had examples.
Yes, we've had a lot of experience with that. Some of our experience includes work for DODEA, which is Department of Defense Education Activities. And in our work with them, we have worked with them on multiple school districts in the U.S. and abroad. They have a approach to 21st century education that they call their 21st century education model. So much, I just want to say that our approach resonates with this so much. We think this is the key, right? And so a lot of the discussion can be about how you learn, but there's a corresponding approach to how you teach, right? And so not only are you looking at how you create facilities for students, but how do you create a next generation model for teacher collaboration, teaching, and things like that. Sometimes that can be a struggle to a faculty team or a curricular team. When we work with DODEA, we would travel to these school districts and their educational leadership team would talk to them about their goals, their aspirations, and explain to them almost their program and why they were looking to develop the kinds of spaces they wanted to develop. So we have been involved in this. We distributed today, and hopefully we'll get to it, what I call a skeleton agenda for our initial visioning sessions. Enough to give you some sense of how we would like to structure it, but loose enough that you can tell us, yeah, we like that, or we're not going to do this quite right, or exactly like that, not right. And so we think very much beginning to understand your approach, what are your highest aspirations, your common goals, what are the critical things that we have to incorporate into the building design. That is so important before you draw the first line, right? That's why I said, like, the other thing I would say, relative to my comments about the idea that we put forward, you can have a stellar approach to how you want to teach and how you expect students to learn, but you have to realize it in a compelling way, right? So you have to bring both of them together. You have to have a sound approach to pedagogy, and then you have to deliver a building that's really good, and so those things come together, and that's really where that's why I'm here. That's why we're all here together, right? So.
Okay. Others? I want to talk a minute about one point in our interview with SMMA. I was not part of the design selection team, but I did sit in on all the interviews. And in your interview, I asked the question, we have outlined a series of very aggressive objectives, okay, with regard to schedule, with regard to cost, with regard to sustainability, and with regard to the educational process. And I asked for a reaction to that versus the financial numbers that we laid out. And this is one of those great moments where your whole team goes silent and looks at Lorraine, right? And what she said, it's very honestly, I think it will be challenging, okay? And quite honestly, in our discussions that came up, and we were appreciative of your acknowledging that, as opposed to, we can do anything you want for money. And I think I want to emphasize the fact that we understand it will be challenging. We don't want to give up on any of the things that we want, okay? But I think it's important to note as we begin our work together that we have a fairly significant challenge in front of us to move forward on these fronts that we've outlined aggressively within a budget that is going to be reasonable to our town. So I don't want anybody here to be naive of that. There's a lot of work to get there, okay? And we're not committed. We're committed to the end goals that we're talking about. We're not committed to any specific thing in terms of the process of those. And I think it's important that we're all on the same page there, that this is going to be aggressive to meet the schedule we have under the budget we have, and we have a lot of work to do in that regard. Okay, thank you for that update. I've been on a lot of presentations. It's never easy to do the same presentation twice. Okay, because the amount of energy you get up for that first presentation is extraordinary.
Can I just, Court, we made room for you. Please come join. Is there a chair? Just grab a chair, roll it over.
Okay, so with that, we want to...
Andy, do we have any
Grab a
extra
chair, what's
handouts?
that? I just made room for you.
So now we're turning the corner and we're going to start to get into more specifics, okay? And the first is probably a quick update on where we are with the scheduling, with the schedule for the contract, for the SMMA contract.
So as of right now, the first milestone is getting the architects on board, and right now we're on schedule. And so as of yesterday, we come to an agreement with the contract term and agreement. So that was sent over to the town manager for their review. And right now we're still waiting for the fee proposal. I should get that by today or tomorrow. Once we get it, we'll review it and then make the recommendation and send it over to Stephen. But right now we're on track.
Sure. I apologize for being late.
It was a little ice.
Cannot, as Jeff Spicoli said, just keep it here on time. So I did review. I will say, we put a relatively standard set of terms and conditions into the solicitation, so they knew what they were getting. I wouldn't say there was a lot of comments on it. I've reviewed them. I forwarded some to the superintendent for her review, and I've sent their comments to town council, and they'll look at it next day or so.
We do have, we have a finance committee meeting scheduled for, I believe it's December 7th?
Yes.
December 7th, Thursday, December 7th. And one of the items that I have been thinking about for that is a review of that fee schedule vis-a-vis the budget, go over the whole budget for this current project. So that's a place where we can talk about that with regard to this meeting. Okay. All right, and now the larger schedule. You want to move to the larger schedule for the project, Anne?
Great. So we did take some more time and put together an updated schedule analysis. What you have on the screen here shows that the top two schedules are design and build, and the bottom schedule is a CM at-risk approach. In the top schedule assumes no acceleration to any phases. We've assumed a 4-month feasibility study, 4-month schematic design. We've taken into account your 90-day town approval and funding process. So you'll see that 45 days till town meeting and 45 days after that for the vote. And then commence with, again, a traditional design and construction schedule from there on out. That would get a school opening and occupancy date of August 4th, and that's in your handout. And that, as we know, is very close. So in light of that, we did put together the second schedule, which based on conversations with Hill, it seemed that there may be a possibility or interest in going at through a portion of the design at some risk. So in this schedule, the only difference is that it authorizes the DD to the design development stage to start after the town meeting as opposed to after the town vote. So you'll have already had one public meeting, not the vote, but so you'd be exposed by about 2 months in terms of assuming the vote would pass or not. So that pulls your move-in date to June 23rd. Which is a lot more comfortable, I think. So that's a possibility. And then the last schedule that we did was a permutation, again, of something we presented in the interview. And as you can see, it gets not quite to a fall 2022 opening, and it's a little earlier than a spring 2023 opening. So it falls in the middle there, and basically, that's all that we feel comfortable recommending, is that you might have a winter move-in. That being said, if you were to say this is your priority when we talk about those goals in terms of schedule and budget, then we could work with the CM and see if they could propose something that would be more aggressive and get you in fall 2022.
Can you say that again? What the key part at the end there, where there was a phrase, we recommend. Which of these do you think is that? I mean, where are you right now in terms of the feasibility of these last two?
I wouldn't say that we have a recommendation per se at this time, without having talked to you about construction manager at risk and your goals around schedule and budget, because it's a comprehensive dialogue. But at this time, the middle schedule that would give you more room between the move-in date and the actual first day of school is, of course, a comfortable schedule, assuming that the town is comfortable with that risk of proceeding that development early.
I think what Kristen was mentioning on the CM at risk approach was that we didn't want to make the timeline for construction more aggressive. That's all we would recommend at this stage, unless you've got a CM on board and they said we can build it faster. We've already condensed it with an early site package, an early concrete and steel package. But from our experience, we don't want to say they can do it even faster than that. But there are obviously trade-offs, because in our experience, a CM at risk has an increased cost over design to build. You're getting a different quality of contractor, you're getting different services, so you have to understand, is that value added to the project and is that value added to the town? And that's a bigger discussion. That's why right now Kristen's saying it's really a discussion we have to have over, it goes to the challenge, budget, schedule, and all the other priorities. But these are three
So the
realistic
things that, if you
schedules.
were just for a minute to focus on the middle option, what are the things, help me with some of the parameters of which we will, what decisions we will be making that are implicit to the middle schedule, okay? What are the major things we'll be considering in this decision?
So in the middle schedule, there's an at-risk component for the town. You'd be authorizing us to commence the design phase in advance of the town vote. So if the town vote was not successful, you'd still owe the OPM and the designer fees for services for about 2 months.
Yeah.
So we can quantify that with Hill and understand what that value is as we move into the process.
Right.
But I think, between these three schedules right now, it doesn't prevent us commencing. They're all basically, we will figure this out during the feasibility stage, but it needs to be determined before we do the cost estimating.
And in this decision between design and build and construction manager at risk, where are those in these two options?
That decision needs to be made in feasibility study.
But are one of those things embedded in either of these two alternatives?
The green one is the CM at risk, and the two above it are only design bid build.
So both of the others are designed to build, okay.
I think what Lorraine's saying is that we need to select our delivery method, DBB or CMAR in the next 2 to 3 months.
Correct.
In order to say, we're gonna go down one of these roads and it's either orange and yellow. The only difference there is that we accelerate when they start DD. Or green, which is CMAR.
So is that by the beginning of February, or when is?
Yes. Yes, because it
I always hesitate with the 2 to 3
So-
months.
So what we'll do, and Kristen has a far more detailed schedule behind this that breaks out all the different intricacies of feasibility between the visioning and the planning, and then when we start doing massing and cost estimating. Cost estimating is the key point, because we will cost it as a design bid build project, or we will cost it as a CM at risk project,
Right.
and they are two different values. So even at feasibility, when we're putting out alternatives and you're comparing them, you want to compare the costs based on whether it's a DBB or a CM at risk. So I would say early February is probably, we need to have that decision made. And that's not to say that we couldn't analyze it both ways in feasibility. We could show you what it means as a DBB versus CM at risk, and then it'll be part of the discussion, which I talked about. You're gonna have to figure out your priorities a little bit, and we'll have to measure what's most important.
And in that discussion, you may have, I try to ask questions that a lot of people
Sure.
would be answering. In terms of that decision, what are the major components of difference that you would highlight?
So one thing we always look at is what is the impact to students during construction? Will the students' life be impacted, the students in the school be impacted while we're building the new building? If so, how? Is it an aggressive impact where we're gonna be putting up temporary petitions in the existing building if it's an addition renovation project, and you need to have a real collaborator as your contractor working with you hand in hand? Or are we building separate and distinct? We can secure it, we can be, concealed over here. Or is there a schedule driver that's really forcing us to do an early site package? And if that schedule driver reaches the priority decision making, then it's sort of forcing us in the decision of CM at risk, because you're not gonna bid your foundations and your steel to one contractor and then bid the rest of the project to another. So you really need that early package opportunity that you get through CM at risk if schedule is the driver.
And I know that we have had some discussions that Don has mentioned very often, that recently design and build projects have been coming in either at or below budget, CM at risk probably not as much. Is that a fair statement there?
So the market is extremely fickle right now, as Don knows. I think it depends on the other projects that are being bid at the time, how saturated is the market. We're experiencing an extreme shortage in labor. All of our projects are seeing it, whether it's design bid build or CM at risk. An extreme shortage in labor, and I know Frank was involved in Minuteman, and we can't get those students through there and into the trade soon enough, to be quite frank. But, pardon the pun. But I think we really need to look at when we think we're gonna hit to market and what that's gonna be, what that date is, what other schools are in the pipeline at that time frame to see if we're gonna be oversaturating. And it's not a simple answer, I apologize, Tim, if I'm making it too broad, but there's a lot of factors that we have to think about.
So what I'm most interested in is what we have to do in terms of a leadership group in order to ensure that that decision is made in an effective way by whatever we said there, early February.
So I think working with Hill, we can lay out a presentation. We've done many of these presentations and sort of big presentation specific for Concord Middle. The pros and cons, both from a high level perspective of it, down to the minutia of schedule, costs.
So when it comes to cost, they're gonna be doing an analysis, like the cost for going with a CM at risk. Typically, I'm seeing like between 10 to 15% on the premium, and a versus or higher. But,
No, I think you're higher a little bit than what we see.
Oh, okay. And also taking that cost and compare it with the operation costs of the two schools that PVD and Sanborn right now. So comparing that to see what the benefit if we could go accelerating this by getting the student in by October 2022. So we're gonna do, excuse me. So we're gonna do a lot of comparison and then have more meetings to discuss this before we go to the board.
And I would also like to point out that the CM schedule as presented is an acceleration of all phases, so this one still does also assume a DD release, a design development release after town meeting and not town vote. So there would still have to be buy-in on that risk. And also it assumes a shortened feasibility study to February, end of February completion instead of an end of March, which again would only be possible if decisions are made very quickly and soundly to get us there on an early feasibility study wrap-up.
So you said completing the feasibility study by the end of February, is that what you said? Okay. And that would be taking a look at the work that we've already done, revisiting the assumptions associated with that, and essentially looking back at it again, particularly in comparison to renovate, okay? So we have that financial, and I think we all know that we have implicitly made the decision to go new building, but we have to update the justification of that in terms of the cost justification of that in terms of particularly not going with the MSBA. So that's work to be done by the end of February.
Can I ask a question?
Hey,
Oh, sorry.
That's you.
No, go ahead. You were here first.
Yeah, that's right. So just a question on the third one, and I will confess my bias from the beginning that I would love to see us in October of 22 for various reasons, educational and operational costs. But one thing that jumps out at me is the town meeting July 24th. And from a political perspective, that's a tough one because we could easily be accused of trying to hide this vote in the summer when people aren't around. So I guess I'm saying, could we do it a month earlier? But I mean, I'm just kind of pointing that out. It's a factor. Is that is there any movement on that? Or are there other ways to look at it?
I think that as is the feasibility and schematic design period is very compressed.
Right, is already.
As is, so
I assume that was the
I
answer.
think that you would be losing a lot of investigation, programming, and understanding of concepts to try and accelerate that.
Yeah, okay.
And I think we took that into account. We had a discussion about visibility.
Right.
We did not want to propose a town meeting that occurred during school vacation or in the summer, but knowing that there's the 45 days and before and the 45 days after, it really that 90-day window adds a lot of time.
It's the only way to do it. Okay. That's good to know.
You mentioned the fickleness of the market. Is there a connection between when the project is out to bid and the pricing?
I would say yes. If we look at it and that all the projects are being bid in roughly the same time, contractors are going to need to pick and choose, and they are somewhat confident that they're going to get something. If a lot of work is under construction and they're trying to fill their backlog, definitely a better time to bid.
So is one variable to set the schedule to maybe looking at a window that you think is optimal for bidding?
I think it would be a factor that we look at. I don't think it should be the driving factor.
Other questions about the schedule? Okay.
I would say this, the contractor did the trade school did a job the other day, and we're gonna have 7 bidders for a specific, I think it was the sprinkler system. It came in 3 times what the estimate was. Okay. And up in New Hampshire, I have a son that's doing it, working at the University of New Hampshire. And they get 1 bid on packages, and it's, double what it should be. So right now is not the time to go out with a new building, because the bidding is, everybody's bidding, everybody says we'll bid it, and then drop out. So you end up with 1 or 2 bidding the job, you don't get a really good look at what the job is really worth. And they all know it, and the prices are up. So I think we have to face that. But that hump may be gone by the time we get there. I don't know. But that's where it is right now.
All right. Any other questions on the schedule? Sounds like we have a good amount of work to do in the next 2 months.
Yeah, the sooner we lay that out, the better, because it's huge.
And
implications.
again, I hate to belabor this point, but the major things that we're considering are when is the appropriate time throughout the process for the vote, and for the move into the school. Okay, when is the best? And 2, there are cost implications of all of this and what these various alternatives cost. Am I missing other major factors?
I have one other one. With some of the sustainability aspirations, I would want to consider a filed sub-bid situation and looking at, from a general design bid build, you take the lowest bidder and recognizing what their capabilities may or may not be. We should just consider that, because some of the, in particular, the passive house aspirations, if you will, and desires, we just want to sort of look around and see what sort of contractors are doing that kind of work, because we may find that is design bid build. And I'm the first one to say that may save us money in the climate right now, but they may not give us the product that we need. So that's something worth considering.
Yeah, I have to admit, when I'm thinking about this and that level of decision making, our goals with related sustainability are in my mind. I know that we're going to have some very direct and very detailed conversations related to how far we go and what the cost of that is. And frankly, it kind of not scares me, but it concerns me to have those discussions in a climate where we're moving really, really fast, right? Because I think they're very important. I think that the community has very strong goals related to sustainability, but we also, have aggressive, not maybe aggressive, but definite financial goals and educational goals, and that balance is really, that balance is something we're going to have to spend a reasonable amount of focus and time on, and I just want to be mindful of that, trying to do that in a constrained time period to meet a certain set of guidelines, I think will be ambitious. Is that?
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
But that's our charge. Our charge is to lead you and guide you, to help you make those decisions, to help you prioritize, to help you understand the big picture. And that's what we do every day, and that's part of what excites us.
We're glad you're here.
If I may add, between Lincoln and Wellesley-on-the-Well, we have access to like live costs right now
Yeah.
on a lot of these components, whether it be HVAC, insulation, triple glazing, 3 equals triple glazing. I mean, we have the whole gamut to bring you this information.
What are the delivery methods on those? I know one of them's still Esty, isn't it? Is Wellesley?
Lincoln is CM.
Lincoln's
Lincoln
CM. So
is
CMAR.
construction document almost 100%.
But it's CM at risk, it's already
Oh, it's
started.
CM.
CM at risk,
Yes.
okay. And then
Wellesley's
Wellesley's still
buying
in,
CM.
they're also doing CM at
That's
risk.
their plan. correct.
So just something to consider, because you can push a CM in ways that you can't push a general contractor when it comes to oversight and, you know, you can't ever control the filed sub-bids, they are what they are, and you have to draw those appropriately, but he has the leverage to, you know, you can push a CM. So just something to consider, because I think with some of what we're trying to do, it may be a factor in that decision.
Okay, any other schedule questions?
Well, just this one, Don. Our conversation suggests that CMR assumes an aggressive schedule, but we can still CMR and dictate a schedule that isn't quite as aggressive as this one.
Yep.
So I want to
Absolutely.
make that clear.
It doesn't have to be this, yeah.
I have another quick question, actually. Sorry, just comparing it to, I'm back on town meeting dates and end dates again. But if you compare, I'm gonna call it yellow versus green. From the green with the CMR, if you move back up to the DVB schedule, you have the town meeting going from July 24th to August 21st. So it's really only a month later, basically. And then the moving date is significantly later. I'm assuming that's a result of the DVB and everything else. So I guess what I'm getting to is if we went CM at risk and decided to play with these schedules a little, could you conceivably move that town meeting, you know, to the very end of, let's say, end of August, and have a date that's somewhere in the middle because you're CM at risk? You know, kind of bump it all out a month without bumping it out 5 months.
Possibly, we can definitely look at that when we do our analysis of
Okay,
CMO.
so it's just to get a feel for how we can play with them. Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you.
Again, you know, I think the goal right now is for this group of people to get familiarized with it's in front of us and to start to understand what the implications of various alternatives are. And that's kind of where we are. They will very well lead us through the process, but everybody should be thinking about the dilemmas inherent to these decisions, because the decisions will start to come pretty quickly.
Can I just paraphrase real quickly what Heather, I think, is trying to say, is that we prefer a town vote before school ends, right as it starts, but not as late as an election ballot. Is that true? Like, we're trying to find for next year. So either before the end of school, which is like somewhere in the correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like this came up and we talked about it.
In terms of a town meeting,
the ballot, right? And the town meeting is
I'm speaking more about the town meeting, but.
You're thinking about town meeting?
I'm thinking about town meeting because I think we'll be better off if we don't try to have a special town meeting in the middle of the summer.
Yeah, I guess anything in the middle of the summer is not good.
Right, although
From
a
timing
a
standpoint.
ballot vote could handle it more because people can absentee vote.
They can, okay.
Right,
Where
whereas
you have to be
town
present
meeting,
at town meeting.
right, would be harder.
Okay, just so you guys
Close
understand
to
what the parameters kind of are, we're trying to hit either before everyone leaves for the end of the school year or right as they're coming back.
Or right as they're coming back.
Yeah, okay.
All right. Thank you for that. And now, I think let's turn a little bit to an equally interesting topic, the beginnings of the educational machines discussion. And I think we put sort of a preliminary set of ideas here. Want to talk about that a little bit?
So, again, this is just a framework for discussion as to how we would propose to move through this. We've identified an initial date on Thursday, December 12th. We think that this would be a fairly focused meeting with what we're defining as the educational leadership team. I suspect that would be Lori, Justin. I don't know if you have a lead faculty member, a curriculum director, some appropriate representation from the building committee or the town, but pretty focused with the educational programming team from our side and that group to almost establish the ground rules, iron out the process, identify the highest aspirations for the project, help us from misstepping as we walk through the detailed visioning with your faculty and school community and things like that. So I identify some things that we would like to talk about. I mean, I think your 21st century learning vision diagram, very interesting. We'd like to get behind that, understand a little bit what the concepts are that are driving that. I looked at your website. I know that there's a school improvement plan on there that includes some things. How do those get tied into this assignment? We'd like to talk about that. And then we would like to talk to you in that session about what we would do in educational visioning session 2. In educational visioning session 2, which is a little, it's much more detailed. I personally believe that there is great value in kind of corporate sessions where everybody talks and hears it, and then there's great value in more focused sessions. And so we just like to understand, and we don't really know what those core groups are. I've identified some here that might make sense based upon our previous experience, but you know your staff, you know the right people to pair together, who not to, right, help that facilitate. I don't want to read every item here. I will only point out that there is a little conflict within educational visioning session 2. If you look at Wednesday, January 8th, right at the top, it says the session goes from 1 to 3, and then if you look at the sessions down below, it actually says it starts at 9. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. That I know we're going to take a tour through the building today. Yes. I really like to walk through it with the educators, and they say, I can do this here. If I had this, I could do that better. Right. This is really great. I'd like these students to be together for this. I'd like them to be separate for that. And so there's a piece of it that you walk through a building, and then sometimes you look at it operationally, and other times you look at it from the different people's perspective. So I think that's really helpful, and we'd like to do that right at that time. Some of the other things we would do within within that team, we would look at all the buildings that you've gone to see already, get feedback. Like at Lincoln, what we did is we put drawings up of every building you walk through. What did you like about that? What did you like about that? There's another piece we do, sometimes we call precedent studies, which is different than benchmarks, right? Benchmark is who is doing what we strive to do and how do they do that? And precedent is a little bit about, what's an interesting building, a building solution. And just the whole process is, I love that, I hate that, I might consider that. That provides a lot of feedback as to where you're headed, both from an educational perspective and then as well from the town approval process, right? We could propose a building that satisfies every one of your concerns but deviates from the spirit of the community, right? We don't want to do that. We have to bring them together, right? So it's that whole process for doing that. And so that's what the third session proposes. And again, we've done this before, and I would say that the third session, none of this is about building design. It's about educational visioning and modeling. And that I would say that in the third one in January has to be a joint presentation between you, the township, and us. And almost just a report out. We've done this visioning. This is where we stand. Do you have input, comments, feedback? Just a way to kind of communicate progress through as to where we stand here. So, I mean, I think what's really, we'd like to set this educational vision in session 1, confirm that date, ask you to identify who the key people that you would bring to that meeting, and then through that meeting, we would then clarify and refine the schedule for session 2, but it would generally be in line with what we're talking about here. I would say that also with Envisioning 2, we begin to talk about programming at a conceptual level. I need these kinds of spaces, I need those kinds of spaces. I don't know that we're gonna outline every single one and assign all the areas to them to come up with a fixed program, but we would make significant progress toward that. Phil, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that. But
I think that's fine. We also need to include educational meetings with the educators.
Yes.
So we'll define groups of educators and how we can talk to grade level or subject level, subject type, and so on, so that we can really have meaningful sessions with the educators and building users. So it's and building staff as well. So that all has to be factored into a schedule and relatively tightly, and that's probably going to overlap with some of the visioning.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that I probably missed here, we probably want a meeting with the facilities team, operational team, whether that happens within these 2 days or some other time. It would be, it's great to hear like all the information simultaneously, right? And then you can balance it all. So maybe we would tweak that just a bit.
So this is your overall initial kind of general, okay?
Yes.
Laying out of the process. I'd be interested in from our educational people, the school committee members, and a couple of school staff, the initial reaction to this. And
Yeah, it's very much in line with what I expected. I can't commit to dates without checking a few calendars and talking with Justin on building level activities and things like that. The part that's been the struggle, I think, for us, and I'll speak for Justin, we're the professional educators in the room and look at all the rest of you. So getting the staff in this, and we let them know last week that this was becoming more imminent, and their energy and enthusiasm to be in the discussion is really palpable. So it's exciting to give them some concrete dates, and just, I need to voice the importance of their input in this process. So this, I think, addresses that and gives them that. We'd love to talk on the 21st visioning, and I hate that jargon, but anyway, that was a very small sample representative that collaborated on that. So we need to talk on how it fits in, given how small of a sample it was. Because I'm a little hesitant to say it spoke for everyone. It certainly is the right direction with all the district and building level work we're doing, but that document was produced by literally 10 people, so we don't want to overstate its value. Part of the challenge is going to be we're designing a vision of education in this process. We're having those big picture discussions, but we're still in that early stage of what are we aiming for here. And so we're going to have to be talking with educators who, I think in some ways we're still trying to learn what the options are, and so I think we're going to need your help in informing them on what's going on around us outside of Concord right now too. So it's that mixed bag. So it's going to be a lot to talk about, and we need to firm up who's on the middle school leadership team, the educational leadership team. It's certainly Justin and I, the director of teaching and learning. I'd like to talk more on who else would be involved and what building level leadership would be involved. But it's exciting. If you give us these concrete places, we're going to get all that figured out and be ready to roll. So thank you.
Yeah, from our committee standpoint, I think it's Dr. Hunter's decision in terms of who's involved with this. We're all absolutely interested in this in terms of what's going to come out of it and how it will be defined. But these meetings should be populated with the people who are most relevant and most integrated into the process. And I'm sure that in the regular course of our meetings, we'll get regularly updated about where you are. So I guess the big point is don't feel like you're being excluded when this process starts to take off and gain acceleration. within this group. We will hear about it here, but a lot of us will not be intimately involved in many of these discussions. Is that a fair statement?
That was my
It's your call.
thought, was that it would be a very professionally based dialogue, and then the feedback would come in the bigger group, so I think I agree.
I would also say that there's, in terms of time allocation, I try to identify reasonable chunks of time based upon what we've done before. If there's a time slot during the day that works better for you, or you think this needs to be a little longer, a little shorter, all that stuff is,
Great. So
there's
we'll
some
spend all the time
latitude
on
in
it.
developing that, yeah.
Tweak it.
Can I ask a question or make a suggestion? In my experience, and I've done it a million different ways, sometimes you include the community in some of these as opposed to reporting out. It's inclusive. Sometimes it's strategically selected, and then sometimes it's, we'll let you, like, this is just about education and the process, and we'll report out. So it sounds like the third that I described is what you're suggesting so it's basically in January that it's, there are public meetings that anyone can come to versus sort of private or strategic. Just thinking about how transparent we're trying to be and how inclusive we're trying to be. Just something to think about if you want to open it up to a small group or, anyone who's intimately involved in the education and how that's being delivered in Concord. Just something to think about because we don't want to be seen as, doing something and then just share. So just something to think about. And I've done it all different ways. Every town is different. So
I will say that first of all, I agree that how you shape this flexibility in there. My assumption in putting this together is that we would establish some ground rules, be a little confident about where we're headed, present that to the community and solicit feedback. So not simply a report out on January 23rd, but almost a progress report, and then solicit feedback in real time and legitimate opportunity for feedback so you could revise where you're headed, but at least get enough pieces in place so that you could report on a framework where we think we're headed.
And I wasn't suggesting that all the community be involved in all of this. I'm just wondering if either the 8th or the 9th or that sort of middle section, if it starts to include a few people that can be advocates when we go out and share it to the bigger community. Just something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, any other comments here? Thank you, this was very helpful. Looking forward to hearing the reports.
Yeah.
Okay, Andy, you want to tell us a little bit about where we now stand on the project charter goals and objectives?
So we got some feedback on the suggestion on the charter. So what we did, we put together all the suggestions on this sheet here. So far we got 84 suggestions. So what our team will be doing in the next step is work with the design team and you and Co to try to break this down into even further, more manageable, break it down. So let's take a look at go over some of the comments.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're going to have the time to go over the detail of all of these.
Yeah. I don't think it's necessary for us to sit and go through all of these. I would like to thank everyone who did send something in. Very, very helpful. It definitely was an interesting process going through the bullets on the left and seeing how people put them together and what their thought process was on what's really most important to them. I think what would be more important is if we actually, collectively as a group, review them on your own, and kind of look at them and say, yeah, that makes sense to me. No, I'd like to combine this one with this one. It's a living document. It's not something that we're going to set in stone today, tomorrow, or probably even next week. But we do need to, hone it in and narrow it down so that when we do come through this project and as we're going along the steps of the project, we can look back at it and say, yes, we are hitting that goal. That is what we were looking for. And sometimes you may go through it and say, we're not hitting that goal. But you know what? Maybe we've decided to change what that goal is. So, like I said, this is gonna be a living document, so as the process moves on, some of these things may change. I think it's important that we go through it with SMMA and review it with them and get their feedback on it. You know, they are doing these visioning sessions as well, so I think that throughout that process, with this team, we can definitely narrow it down and make it a little bit more concise. But it's not something I think that we should go through 84 bullets right now and
Just
discuss.
to remind everybody what happened here, is that at a previous meeting, way over on the left, we all went around the table and everybody said comments about various areas. That's what's on the left. The notion is to try to get, for each of these big areas, I think there are 11 of them or somewhere in that neighborhood, a simple statement, okay, that we can continually refer to, okay? What's on the right here is the people who responded to attempt to do that. So you'll have, like, I think there's 7 or 8 here, individual comments of that synthesis, okay? What our mission is to try to take what is on the right plus your additional thoughts as you look at this and start to think about what would one statement be on the right, okay, in terms of the sort of a big goal. So that at the end of the day, and hopefully that day is by the end of the year, in my opinion, that we would have this statement of about 11 items, 10 to 15 items. These are our sort of really high level goals. Okay, that's what we're trying to get. This is kind of where we are. So I think we're making progress. Okay. There will be, quite honestly, I think there'll be some additional work in the big group, but there'll probably be also some work from the management team to look at these. It's very hard to go from 15 to 1 in a big group. Okay, what's really good is a discussion in a big group that allows people to help make that synthesis. But our goal is to get by the end of the year these down to those statements. Any other questions about this?
I think implicit in this is that it maps against the strategic plan for the school district, it maps against the town's master plan, but I think we ought to be more explicit about that review. I think that gives us a lot of comfort, so I think a couple of us should take that on between now and the end of the year.
And if you haven't done this, feel free to do it, okay? And get added to this through Julie. The sooner the better, so we can, continue this process. But thank you, Julie, you guys for putting this together in order. So those are the major items. In terms of correspondence, I know of one letter that we received, and unfortunately I don't. Okay, it's a gentleman, Phil Gibson, who works on the Concord Carlisle Youth Baseball and Softball, and essentially it's a letter, a very thoughtful letter that is trying to get to us early in the process to inform us of their use of the fields at Sanborn and how important they are to the community, and ask us to consider in our design process for the campus those needs for the future. And I think it's fair in terms of we would like to have what we have now, and of course we have some wishes, but we understand that they may not all be included in the project. We will respond, and essentially the response will be that we're going to go through a site planning process in some detail, and this is one of the items that we'll certainly consider the current use of the facilities. Okay, so I think that's the only.
That's the only.
significant-
Was this shared with the design team?
No, not yet.
No,
Just can be.
no.
Okay, no, I know it just came yesterday, and I read it, but yeah, it'll be helpful for you,
Great, yeah.
field orientation and the,
Right.
defense-
We anticipate
there's-
working with your athletic director and whoever else
Yeah.
from your end wants to work on it with us, and
This is
we'll
Concord
program.
Carlisle, like a club, so it's not so much school, it's town use, just so you understand.
Sure, but that's all integrated, right? It's
Exactly,
school
so
use
we
and
get to
it's town
include
use.
all of them.
It's all
Those are
integrated.
actually town fields, so yes, we're gonna
Okay.
be very
Yes.
inclusive of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So it's great that he's already thinking about it, and we'll include him in the
Very
process.
Excellent.
All right, in our meetings, we always allocate a few minutes for our community input at the end, and I'll open it up right now for that, yes. And always identify yourself and your.
Okay, Carlin Reed from the League of Women Voters. Thank you for the concern about transparency. I think that will serve you well in the long run. I'm going to encourage that your meeting on the 23rd of January be videotaped, because it will be a resource that you'll want to use later on. That's it. Good, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, any other new business? Okay, I think we're just about finished. I thank everybody for the good work. During the Thanksgiving work, we have a lot to be thankful for in terms of the amazing group of people that we have around the table, this project. And more fundamentally, I think we can be thankful for that we are in a position in the community that is thinking in a very forward manner about education for our children, okay, and what it means. And I think that's something that we can all be thankful for next week. So have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll see you shortly, I'm sure. So, I take a moment, motion to adjourn. Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.